Hey guys, good evening. Usually come to you earlier on the day, but this is the first time I've had first point of today where I've actually had a little bit of time. I was doing multiple tasks. I was working on the marketing end of our restoration business as well as a lot of stuff on my own end. So I finally got a chance to get everything together for tonight's show. I had most of it planned out ahead of time, but as always, something's got to change, so it is what it is. Tonight we're going to talk about something versus the power of connections and the power of what you have and the power of who you have relationships with versus selling. I've done both. I've done selling where I've gone to 5 or 6 doors every single day and tried to sell to somebody and try to make a nice contact with them. And, it was basically a warmer lead. So they already knew I was in there, but I was trying to upsell them and get them additional products or services and get them onto some maintenance programs, things like that. So I understood the thing of selling. One of the things I didn't understand until I went into business myself was the power of connections. Now, one of the most powerful books, one of the most popular books out there for selling is called The Little Red Book of Selling. Jeffrey Gitomer wrote it. Great book. Pretty much the standard of the Bible almost for selling from that standpoint. And it's a great book. He also wrote a book called The Little Black Book of Connections, which I think is a better book. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about the power of connections and power of who you have relationships with and the advantages to working with connections versus selling one-to-one. So I made up a list. Always got to make up a lot of notes. Yeah, this is my lousy penmanship. But I make a lot of notes. None of this stuff is kind of off the top of my head. So, sometimes it is. But for the most part, this is stuff that's kind of planned out. What I did is I put down one column versus the other. So when I talked about connections, one of the things is it's a longer game versus a short game. So when you're doing connections, they're harder to get as far as a customer, as far as a client. They're much more difficult to try and secure any type of relationship with when you're working with a connection or trying to make a connection because they don't know you. Frankly, you're just, meeting them at that point. Versus selling where you're there for a particular product or service and you're there to sell them maybe a short game. You're selling them a product right now. You're selling them, if you're into restoration work, you're selling the project to clean up the damage in their property or restore their home, or you're cleaning their carpets, or you're fixing their plumbing, or you're clearing the drain, whatever the case is. Pest control, you're getting rid of the pests and the insects that are in the house, whatever that happens to be. The long game is much harder to get. You have to build up a relationship with these folks. So it's a lot tougher to do. Back end versus front end or money now. Money now is nice to get paid today, but if you're in the restoration industry, and I know my partner's on here actually watching right now, he'll tell you in the restoration industry you get money later on. So on the back end, you spend your money in advance to market and promote the business. And then you work with an insurance carrier or a property manager, contractor, whatever the case is, that hires you to come in and do the work. You get paid after the job is completed, usually much longer afterwards than we'd all like to deal with, but it is what it is. So we get paid on the back end onto that. But that's the power of connections. You know that if somebody's referring you, it's a connection-driven issue, that it will be absolutely something that will be based on the back end versus the front end. There's no doubt. A person's going to have higher standards versus a person with medium standards. What does that mean? It means if let's say you have Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Smith knows you. She has a relationship with you. You've been working with her for years. She just loves you, know your kid's name, knows what sports teams you like, knows when your daughter was, knows everything. It's kind of scary when it comes down to it. She is somebody that knows you and has a relationship with you, the connection with you. So she is going to have high standards when she refers to her friend, Mrs. Jones. So the burden of proof or the burden of standard there is much higher when Mrs. Smith is referring to Mrs. Jones, because Mrs. Smith already knows you're a rock star. She plans for you to be a rock star for Mrs. Jones, her friend. So the standard is higher. Better client, better customer. You don't have to prove anything to them, but you got to over-deliver. There's no question about that. Going toward the connection aisle. Relationships versus dating. This really gets down to it with connections versus selling. When you're dating, you're going on a date, and that's it. It's finished. If you're worried about a long-term relationship, that's a connection. Just like life. Doesn't make a difference. So the power of having the connection is much stronger than a short-term dating situations. There's a thing called attrition in a business. Attrition means what stays in your business, who you stay working with, who stays in your fold, so to speak, as a customer is happy. Mrs. Smith, she loves you. That's an attrition rate. The attrition rate stays higher when you retain your customers. We know that the people we market to, from a water damage standpoint, our attrition rate is very low because we seem to really keep them, and they're great people, and we're lucky and blessed to have them. But we have to make sure our attrition rate stays low. That means they stay working with us, they stay happy with our referral relationship, and that everybody's happy. So that's vitally important. So attrition rates are much lower when it comes to connections because you don't have to do as much when it comes to that. Circle of influence versus market driven. A connection is going to be a circle of influence. It's going to be a person that knows somebody. The most connected guy I know when it comes to business is a guy named Joe Polish. A couple people here know who he is. He knows everybody, flat out. That's his thing, his shtick is just that he is the most connected and well-known guy and well-liked guy probably in the marketing industry and probably the top marketer in the world right now. We all know where he started if you've been in the business long enough, and where he is now. It's absolutely incredible 25 years later. Just amazing. But his circle of influence is huge, and that's the power of connections versus selling, which is market driven. So whatever you're going to do right now to bring in a customer, you might do something on Google Ads, you found something on Facebook, something on Yelp, do some direct mail, email campaigns, whatever the case is. That's market driven. That's consistent to doing that. It's much better to have that circle of influence saying, hey, Joe P referred me over to you to do, I understand you do the services project. I understand you're the person I got to go to. That's the circle of influence versus the market driven. The market driven is just, hey, I need this job done now. Can you do it? How much? Blah, 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 blah. Versus the circle of influence. So there's no doubt the connection side of circle of influence is much stronger. Easier to work with versus more suspicious. Of course, they're going to be easier to work with because they already have a rapport with you. So that one's without said. Better dollars spent versus a new prospect. No question about that. When you're dealing with a connection and you're marketing to a connection, if you are having to market at all, you're spending much better dollar value than you are on a new prospect that doesn't know you. For instance, we have a relationship with people that refer us into job sites. When they refer us from the job site and they know we're coming in and they actually are there in the house and see this person has a need, has a problem, and they call us from the house right then and there and refer us into the house, the likelihood of us getting that job has gone from a market-driven 35% to now you're at 90% closing ratio. Because that person already has a trust, already has a circle of influence. That contractor, heating contractor, plumbing contractor, whatever, has a circle of influence. They already trust them. You don't have to reprove anything. So it's a better dollar spent. Even though it might be the same money or more money, it's better money spent because of the power of connections and the power of ad spend. Sustainable versus instant gratification would be the last section to that. Connections-based system would be based on sustainable assets. You have an asset, you have a relationship with the person, they already have it. I just talked to a potential client and I asked them if they had, who was their referral sources, who can generate business for them, who can bring in business based on what they want to do. And they're marketing to 1 or 2 people out of the 10 that we went through during a coaching call that they can literally get. So now they have 8 more people that they can go after, and they have relationships with these people already. So it's not like they're 8 people they don't know and 8 market segments to go after. These are 8 people they already had relationships with. They never went after it. They never said, hey, I didn't realize you were a realtor and you can refer me some landscaping work, which is what this company does. A realtor can refer you to landscaping work, especially if in a commercial location, especially if it's on a lease situation. Forget about just buying or selling a home or a building. The landscaper now can get into a commercial facility where maybe that realtor hooked them up for a long-term 5-year or 10-year lease, and they have the ability to now refer you something that could go on for years and be very, very profitable, all based on the power of connections and sustainable value versus instant gratification. So to sum this all up in our 10 minutes, I know it's been a lot, and I'm more than willing to answer any questions. If you watch this and you put something down, post something, I'll be glad to answer piece by piece, because I know it's a lot. The power of connections, the power of having those relationships versus just selling something to somebody. There's really no comparison in my mind. Every business I've ever had has been joint venture driven and relationship driven. So it's been based on trust and ability, and frankly, as I say, doing what you say you're going to do every single time without excuses, making sure something happens every single time. So that's the sustainable value versus the instant gratification. That's the power of connections versus just the sale. If you have it, that is your goal in your business. That is the only value in your business at the end of the day. If somebody goes to buy your business, unless you're a franchise with some name and some back support, even then, it's about your relationships. Company wants to come in and acquire you, wants to buy you, it's about the power of relationships. There's just no question about it. So make sure, if you get a chance, and I'll post a link onto it, or at least a picture of the book here shortly, Little Black Book of Connections by Jeffrey Gitomer. Great book. I just went down some of I'm not saying any of these were in Gitomer's book, because I don't think actually they were, but I'm sure they're written there some way, shape, or form. Actually, I think they are. There might be one or two of them that are written a little bit differently. But you can you'd go from the solid list of 9 that I wrote down here, and I'll be glad to write these down and post them and share them if you want, the difference between the value of connections versus the value of selling. Understand the power of connections, the power of relationships, that there is no comparison versus you spending dollars for a one-time sale. Yes, you get your money up front. Great. That's awesome. But it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. You want something that's sustainable. That's the value in your business. That's the gold in your business. That's it. Episode number 11 is about connections versus selling. I know it came to you a little bit late today, and I certainly do apologize. I will try to do a much better job of getting this thing out more toward midday, but busy people are busy people. You got to make things happen. So if you're out there and you're making things happen, it's not always a perfect time to get to handle things. So my apologies to you, and I value the time that you spent with me here. And feel free again to add any questions. And have an awesome rest of the day. I will see you tomorrow. And that's it. Rock on. Thanks. Bye.